Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some truly fascinating source material that treats real estate and property management not just as, a basic financial transaction, but as a deep dive into human nature. We're going to be looking at what the source essentially calls the laws of nature when it comes to leasing. And honestly, whether you're a landlord or renter, or really just someone who's super interested in human psychology and building generational wealth, this analysis is going to completely flip how you view property. Okay, let's jump right in.
So I want you to think about this question for a second. Should you ever rent your house to a friend? Common sense, and honestly, just having a good heart, might tell you that if a buddy or an acquaintance is struggling, you should absolutely open your doors to them. I mean, you've got an empty property, they need a place to crash, it seems like a perfect match, right? Well, actually, the source material presents a stark reality that says the exact opposite. Which brings us right into Section 1, the Golden Rule of Boundaries.
When it comes to mixing personal relationships with property ownership, the source takes a definitive, totally unyielding stance. It literally says, do not rent to people you know. You will be trapped. And it argues that renting to an acquaintance is essentially a trap for both of you. If you let them in, you can't really exert your natural rights as a property owner, and on the flip side, they can't truly grow. It just completely halts personal development and almost guarantees mutual resentment down the road. It's considered an ironclad rule. Mixing relationships you already have with a lease is a direct ticket to both people getting hurt.
Now look, the source isn't just telling you to abandon your friend to the wolves. Instead, it offers a really strict but ultimately caring step-by-step playbook. Step 1, absolutely refuse the lease. No exceptions. Step 2, if you genuinely want to help them out, provide a little financial assistance so they can go get a completely different place. Give them the boost they need, but do it without entangling them in your own property. And Step 3, treat the whole situation as a personal lesson. The source suggests that if someone you know is coming to you in distress and you feel responsible for them, acknowledge your part in it. Help them externally, and then cleanly sever that financial tie so you both can actually move forward. Moving on to Section 2, testing a tenant's character. So, if we're not renting to friends, how in the world do we evaluate strangers? Well, the source outlines a brilliant psychological tactic for this. When you first meet a prospective tenant, how do you know if they're going to be arrogant or if they're actually reliable? The strategy is to present demanding, really strict lease conditions right up front. Think about it. If you just hand them a simple, easy-breezy agreement, you learn absolutely nothing about their character. But if you present a strict framework and they react with humble acceptance and a willingness to comply, boom, that's your test. If they accept it gracefully, they pass, and you've just revealed their true nature. And the reward for running this initial character test basically comes down to one specific number, 30%. The source explains that if a tenant passes your initial strict test with humility, you as a landlord can actually afford to be lenient later on. Because they've already proven their underlying character, you can forgive up to 30% of their future mistakes or shortcomings. You hold them to a really high standard initially so that you have the internal peace of mind to give them some grace when they actually move in.
All right, Section 3, the true value of employment.
But what happens when you can't test someone face-to-face? The source completely redefines how we look at this situation. I want you to forget about FICO scores for a minute. According to this framework, credit is fundamentally just the state of holding a job. It's the ultimate proof of character and reliability when doing a face-to-face test is totally off the table. Having a job means you're actively maintaining trust with society, and conversely, losing a job means proportionately that your societal trust, or your credit, has dropped.
So the crucial thing here is how this translates into a screening strategy if you're using a broker. If you're a landlord acting through a middleman, you check employment status first. It is incredibly objective. If they're employed, you assign them a higher level of trust, and you can actually afford to be a bit more lenient with your rules. But if they're currently unemployed, their credit in this specific framework has dropped, and that is exactly when you have to enforce the strictest rules possible. It totally removes emotion from the equation and relies entirely on societal reliability.
Let's broaden this out in Section 4, expensive versus cheap properties. Let's scale this whole explanation up to broader market tiers. Because the management styles required for high-end versus low-end properties are vastly different, and honestly, it's a bit counterintuitive. With expensive properties, the source notes that tenants generally possess basic etiquette and societal credit. I mean, they wouldn't be able to afford the place otherwise, right? So you can actually keep conditions quite simple. But with cheap properties, that dynamic flips entirely. Tenants in lower-tier properties might have lost their credit or lack basic etiquette, which can make the environment chaotic. This is where landlords must be the absolute most vigilant. You have to enforce the strictest rules. If you treat a cheap property casually, you are going to get burned.
To put that into perspective, consider this really powerful metaphor from the source. A small hole in the sand collapses the dam. The source is warning us that being careless with small, cheap properties just because you think they don't matter that much is incredibly dangerous. Mishandling a small property can cause a massive chain reaction. You get all wrapped up in terrible tenant disputes, it drains your energy, and suddenly, that tiny little hole in the sand collapses your entire financial dam, destroying your much larger, more valuable assets right along with it.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, a manual for the future.
Now the source pivots from these practical real estate rules to a much bigger, overarching goal regarding generational legacy. Just think about the typical generational divide for a second. How do adults usually try to teach the younger generation? Through words, right? Through constant nagging. And the result? Complete misunderstanding. The youth just don't absorb verbal lectures, but what do they actually need? They need organized data. They want documents, they want blueprints, and clear structures. The source points out that if you just hand the younger generation organized data, they don't even want you to interfere anymore. They'll take that blueprint and use it to achieve independent success perfectly on their own.
And honestly, that is the ultimate purpose behind all these real estate rules we've been talking about today. The goal here isn't just to make a quick buck. It's to systematize our past mistakes. It is literally our duty to take every single failure, every nightmare tenant experience, every boundary we accidentally crossed, and organize it into clear, accessible data. Because if we don't compile this, the source argues that the next generation has no hope. They'll just be doomed to repeat the exact same painful mistakes we did.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Whether you're managing real estate, running a business, or just raising a family, are you leaving behind nagging, or are you leaving behind a blueprint? Are your lessons just a bunch of verbal complaints about the past, or are they structured, usable data that the next generation can actually build upon? It is a really powerful challenge to reflect on what kind of legacy we're truly leaving behind. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I hope this fresh perspective on property and legacy gives you a whole lot to think about.